Are Americans changing their sentiments and attitudes towards the T's? Well, according to data, it would appear so. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been talking about this. When you go fringe and just strictly to the extremes, things change. So this is a new Gallup poll that came out. A large majority of Americans now, 69%, 62% in 2021, say Transformers athletes should only be allowed to compete on sports teams that conform to their birth gender. This is fascinating. America's views on Transformers athletes, and of course, this is in light of Leah Thomas and all the things that we saw happen with being ranked the 400th swimmer to all of a sudden being ranked the #1 swimmer in women's sports. And so it says, next we have a question about policies for competing sports that have separate teams for male and female athletes. Do you think the Transformers athletes should be able to play on sports teams that match their current gender identity, or should only be allowed to play on sports teams that match their birth gender? Okay, so 2021, 34% of folks said able to play on teams that match identity. Okay, 34%. It's 1 out of 3 people in 2021. This is 2 years ago. 1 out of 3 people thought this. Only on teams that match their birth gender, 62%. Now, check this out. 2023, this year, 26% say they should only be able to play on teams that match their identity, while 69% say that only teams that match their birth gender.
So 1 out of 4 people.
So it went from 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 4 people, okay? That's a pretty huge shift in this conversation, if I may say so myself, right? And so now let's look at Americans' views on Transformers athletes by party identification, 2021 versus 2023. Do you think Transformers athletes should be able to play sports on teams that match their current identity, or should only be allowed to play on sports that match their birth gender? So we see amongst Republicans, 2021, it was 10%, okay? Now it's down to 6%, and 86% say no, 93% say no now, so that's a big jump. That's almost, an 8-point jump. But the interesting number is that number right there, the folks that don't have any opinion. That number was 5%.
Wow.
In 2021, and it's I would guess 1%, right? 93. So now it's only 1%. So that's a big decrease in people that just like, I don't know, I don't care. And then amongst independents, which is they say independents are the ones who kind of sway elections and sway policy. 2021, 33%. So 1 out of every 3 independents thought that this was okay, and 63% said no. Now 28%. So there was some ground gained amongst independents, right? 5 percentage points. And 67% say only at their matched birth. So that increased, right? Another decrease. So it went from 4% to 5%. So 96. So now it's 5% that changed their mind. Okay, so that's interesting. So more independents don't have an opinion than they did 2 years ago. That's fascinating. I wonder why.
It's probably it's the leftovers.
Yeah.
That didn't want to go all the way.
And then when it comes to Democrats, 55%
huge change
said that they should be able to match their identity in 2021. And now, so 55% was the majority of Democrats. The majority of Democrats believe this. And now it seems like they do not hold that position. And based on this, 48% have changed their mind and that they should only be able to play with the birth gender.
So even with the Democrats, it's like 50-50, pretty much. I mean, unless you incorporate
technically, the majority of Democrats disagree with it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy. And 6% still don't have an opinion on it. Okay. So what does that mean? That means that whether you want to admit it or not, whether you think this is all phobia, that there is an actual shift happening in the zeitgeist. Hey, you want to see something kind of crazy? Over 75% of the people that watch this channel are not subscribed. Please consider subscribing and turning your bell notification on so that you don't miss anything we have going here. Right? That there's an actual shift happening in the zeitgeist. Because I remember 2 years ago, I remember engaging with conservatives from 2 years ago. And I remember that back then, it seemed like the issues that the left was anchoring on themselves and hitching their wagon on 2 years ago was more like Black Lives Matter, social justice, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Right? And then as the left started hitching their wagon onto all this T stuff, that there's been a noticeable shift. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And that a lot of folks are moving away, and it's not just conservatives and folks on the far right end of the spectrum that are like pushing back, that it's actually a lot of people in the middle. I mean, when you got, because that's 2 years ago was around the time Dave Chappelle started being called a phobic.
Yep.
J.K. Rowling started being called phobic. It's all about 2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a real-time shift happening that I think is not being recognized, and I think it's a huge miscalculation by the folks who are advocating for this in terms of who they decided to hitch their wagon behind and what cause they decided to hitch their wagon behind. And I think this is going to have lasting effects that we probably won't see until the next decade. And I don't know how this is going to play out. I don't know how this. I think it's going to take decades before there's time removed from it, before we see it actually shift.
And what do you mean? What would we see the effects? Like, what do you expect the effects would be?
Like, we come back around after there's long-term studies with control groups done on the drugs they're giving to kids.
Yeah, the hormone replacement therapy.
The hormone replacement therapy.
You're saying it's going to be like a cigarette situation?
Yes.
Like 1950s. It's like, a breath of fresh air.
Breath of fresh air.
And then like 30 years later,
This
we're
is
like,
good for you.
So maybe we don't do that because we're getting cancer.
Yeah, and the whole establishment is going to swap on it. And it's going to be like, like,
we need regulation.
we need regulation. We need to put warning labels on.
21
We need to
plus.
go above and beyond. I mean, they're already acknowledging that there are going to be, that people who start this sort of therapy, I hate that word for this, but the medications,
procedure,
that they will grow up and not develop their full genitals, and many of them will never experience an orgasm. So
that's dark.
The community that seems to be elevating sex to the place of God is about to get a rude awakening and a punch in the throat when they realize that the same folks that are experiencing going through this stuff, that are pausing puberty,
sheesh,
a big percentage of them are never going to have even the proper size genitals to perform these surgeries, let alone the reality of ever having a sexual pleasure.
The social group of eunuchs has come back in a way.
That's an interesting take. That's an interesting tie-in. Yeah. So I think once all this stuff plays out, it's going to be way more sensible. But unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of kids hurt. Yikes. There's going to be a lot of folks that are never able to have kids that change their mind later. There's going to be a lot of folks that are going to miss out on the pleasure of what intimacy is. There's going to be a lot of folks that miss out on a lot of this stuff, and it's sad. It's sad. And I think the people that are pushing back against this stuff, that are being called fringe and radical today, like the Jordan Petersons, right, so on and so forth, I think, honestly, I think are going to be vindicated. I think are going to be vindicated. And I think in hindsight, we're going to look back and be like, ugh, these terrible ideas. By the way, I think this is the direction that the termination of babies is going to go to. I think eventually there'll be such an overwhelming amount of evidence that show that the termination of babies is a net negative to society, net negative to population replacement, net negative to women's health, mental health, reproductive health. And in hindsight, we're going to look back and be like, yeah, like this whole notion of like a woman's right and all this stuff is completely counter to what we know to be optimal for women's flourishing. I really, truly believe that. All right. Hey, this is a segment from our daily after party stream. Consider partnering with us online for as little as $5 a month to get access to these daily after party streams completely unedited. You'll also get access to our podcast as they are streamed live into the community before anyone else gets to see them, get to interact with our guests, get access to our private Discord server, and a discount code for our store for as little as $5 a month. Ultimately, that will help towards helping us continue contextualizing the gospel using media and podcast here on YouTube. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.